Welcome to For Every Response, the podcast from Emergency Services Times, sponsored by MSA Safety. In this series, we bring you sessions from the Emergency Services Show and the Emergency Tech Show 2025. Evaluating tender submissions is a complex process involving multiple stakeholders and subject matter experts. In this final episode with the British Safety Industry Federation, Natalie Wilson leads the discussion about the benefits and challenges of wearer trials. The panel looks at practical guidance on running trials alongside assessments of quality and performance standards.
My name is Natalie Wilson. I am a founder of Workwear Solutions. We're an independent technical consultancy company. I've been in the industry 20 years. In the last 3 years, we've worked exclusively with buyers, helping them to develop their specifications and tender processes. John,
John McIntyre from Merseyside Fire and Rescue Service with 13 years experience in the fire sector. Also work for Cheshire Fire Service. And on the Merseyside, we work for National Resilience as well.
Perfect. Thanks. Simon?
Hi, I'm Simon Ash. I'm the UK and Ireland sales manager for HAIX footwear company. So we obviously supply footwear into many fire services, police services, ambulance services, military as well. So tendering processes are big on our agenda.
Thanks. Alan?
Thanks, Natalie. My name's Alan Murray. I've managed the British Safety Industry Federation, which are all of the manufacturers, importers, distributors, approved bodies, notified bodies in the PPE and safety equipment marketplace. I've been doing that for 12 years or so, but I've been in the industry a lot longer than that.
Perfect, thank you. So I think the sort of starting point is to think about what happens now in a wearer trial evaluation or in an evaluation of a tender process. And again, depending on the level of technical expertise that's within the organisation or depending on how maybe external companies have been engaged in processes, we see sort of a kind of difference. And I have a horror story from about 15 years ago where we did loads of work on a tender and we weren't successful and we got our tender samples back and they hadn't even been opened. So it was like, what was the point in being asked to submit those samples when they weren't opened? And that's an extreme, but how are they assessed? And you know, from a supplier side, I know there's often a worry of that's a pair of trousers, it's got 2 pockets, yeah, that passed, that's through. And actually there's so much more to it, and especially when you're talking about these types of environments that emergency services are working in, the people working in these sectors deserve better than that. And so how do we do that in a way that is building on whatever technical experience might be in the organisation or could be brought into the organisation versus sending them back without opening them, looking and saying that's a pair of trousers or doing something different. And that's really where I think technical support comes in, which is obviously what we do, but also I think is thinking about how the process is managed by the contracting authorities as well. And I know, John, we'll come to you first because I always start with the user because that's where we should always begin all of our conversations. So you work for Merseyside Rescue and you do a lot of the procurement process for the Northwest and, as you said, for the National Resilience. So in terms of your processes for product evaluation or for tender assessment, what are the key things that you look to do or ask for?
What we look for is the specification. Make sure we've got a fit for purpose specification with the standards as well. So when we go to test these, like recent one we done for the Northwest was the fire kit PPE. We used an outside organisation, BTTG, you were here today, and they done compatibility testing with the kit that they're using at the moment. They done scientific testing to make sure that the parts that make up the fire kit actually work and are fit for purpose. Then we done other scientific testing where the kits are burnt at 1100 degrees to see what temperatures that they could withstand. And these were on the dummies with sensors on, so we could see where any burns would appear on firefighters, and we compare it to the previous test that we've done years before on the same kind of test, to make sure that we've got improved kit. After that, we went forward to do trials in the fire grounds. We had firefighters from all over the Northwest, including Northern Ireland, a large group, and we went through a series of trials against criteria, and they were scored. But some of the firefighters in the first one, and don't be afraid of it, doing things twice. Some firefighters said they felt a bit of heat in certain parts, but I noticed that the kit they had on was a bit tight on them. You're supposed to be wearing it loose. So we conducted that trial, got all the feedback, and then we went out and they were in compartment fire to, I've got to get this right now, 180 degrees. So what we did then is we conducted a smaller trial with firefighters from Lancashire and Merseyside at the Lancashire Fire Grounds, and we made sure that the kit on every firefighter was the right size. And then they done the same exercises, and then when they went into the compartment fire, you went in at 250 degrees, and when they come out of that one, they didn't feel any pain or any heat anywhere. And what I'm trying to get to there is, if it doesn't work first time or if there's an issue, always go over it, because what you don't want is for a multi-million-pound contract is to award something that isn't fit for purpose, where, you know, could cause litigation as well at the end of the day.
That's a really interesting process, because you're almost fact-checking what the suppliers are giving you and making sure that it works, and doing those kind of like making sure that that product is going to be fit for purpose, because you've done compatibility testing before you put a firefighter at risk of being involved in those wearer trials. And particularly in emergency services, if you are trialling product that is as safety critical as structural firefighting PPE, you don't want to be testing it for the first time live. That's a really important message. You want it to be lifelike. So as you've done then at the second stage, to then take that, once that product's passed that first stage, to then be looking at doing the testing is a really, really important point. And Simon, from your point of view, from a manufacturer, you're obviously being asked to get involved in wearer trials, you're supplying product for wearer trials. What is kind of your perspective on what's being asked? And you kind of said this earlier, like the good, the bad, the ugly of what you've seen from a manufacturer's point of view.
Well, when the tender comes out, obviously the document lands, and it's immediately a checklist. Okay, right, pens out, specifications, tick, yes, 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 we can do that. Because quite often you'll see a wish list, and this is, I think, where the requirements have to be kind of almost realistic to some point. You can have a wish list of everything that you want, and hopefully you tick every box. But sometimes, if I don't tick that box, does that mean I'm completely out of the tender, or we have to build a completely new boot? So then it's a time process. So if you have a specific requirement, say, how much time are you giving us? If you're giving us only 3 weeks, 4 weeks, then you're going to have to work with what's available on the shelf, because nobody in the best will in the world can generate a new product. If you give us more time, then we can be more flexible.
And this is what we were talking about in the last session in terms of specifications. You can engage with industry as much as you like, right up to the point where you go to market. So use that time beforehand to make sure that the specifications you're putting out can be met, or understand what it is that you want in a specification. And very often, like we've seen from a supplier side previously, there's an expectation or a kind of perception. If you don't allow enough time in your tender process, there's an assumption that's because you just want your incumbent, and it might not be the case, and it isn't how tender process is supposed to work. So making sure that you're building in a reliable and a reasonable amount of time for people to be able to respond to your specifications. And you won't know that if you haven't asked the question about how long things are going to take. I mean,
time is critical in all this. It's kind of, if you want to do we like to see an extensive wear trial, but not too extensive, because it costs a lot of money. It's kind of 12 pairs, 24 pairs, however many firefighters you want. Yes, you want to test female fighters, male firefighters, large, big guys, small guys. You want to kind of get a good mix so everybody gets a feel. But again, time is critical.
Yeah.
If this product is just sitting on our shelves, we're probably not doing as good job as we want. Sometimes you have to wait for it to be stocked and stuff like that. So just give us time. We'll get you everything you need, and in the sizes you want and the specifications you need. But just allow a little bit of leeway to make sure we can give you what you need, so you can do a proper assessment.
Yeah. And you touched on another important point there is who is doing the wearer trial? How do you select the people that are involved in it? And one absolute cardinal sin for me that I have seen a number of times is that I'm going to trial tender a A, John's going to trial tender a B, and Simon's going to trial tender a C. And we've all got our own opinion on that one product, but if you haven't all trialed the same products, you can't have a fair evaluation, and it's not a valid trial. You have to make sure that everyone is able to give their feedback on the same product, doing the same tasks.
Yeah.
Otherwise, it isn't a fair process, and that's something that could be challenged during within a tender process, and that's something that I'm sure you're all quite aware of. In terms of the selection of your wearer trialist, John, you talked about taking people from lots of different regions because you're covering quite a vast area. What's your how do you go about it?
Well, we try to get a cross-section of firefighters from male, female and all gender. In fact, that fire trial I was on about, we did have a transgender firefighter wearing the all-gender kit.
Yeah.
So we do try and get a cross-section of the firefighters. It's not always easy because there's you got to rely on the same people to be available for the trials and getting the feedback from them in a timely manner to the certain set criteria.
Yeah.
So we go to each fire service, ask them for availability on certain dates. Sometimes them dates move, and we have to ensure that we have the same people for the same trial for everyone's kit.
Yeah.
And we usually do it over a 3-day period. I've had the experience where we've had extensive trials, and it gets more difficult to get the feedback in. And one of the things that I start off with at the beginning, which I missed out, is do's and don'ts and ground rules and when things are going to be needed. If you start off on the front foot with where, when and how, and then the feedback and when that's needed. And now what we tend to do is do the feedback straight after the trial. And instead of sending gloves all over the Northwest and Northern Ireland for an extensive trial, we'll do the trials at our fireground training, TDA.
You've got the benefit of having a fantastic training facility that you can use it where you can replicate in a very short space of time.
Yeah.
There are some types of kit or certain environments where you need a longer period to trial product. So, for example, if you've got your if you're looking at police officers everyday wear, just doing that over 3 days isn't a robust enough process because they're not going through enough time or enough tasks to make sure that they're testing that product for durability. And durability is a difficult one to test on because if you might test for 4 or 6 weeks would be a really decent length of trial time, and then you've got some idea of kind of wash and wear. Well, you also need to consider how many pieces of kit are being issued to that person, because are they having to wash it every day to be able to keep trialing it, or how do you kind of manage that? But making sure there's a long enough period, because 3 days on a pair of trousers, if you've got breakdown at that stage, then you should be eliminated immediately. But that's the kind of thing that you need to think about. What's an appropriate amount of time and what are appropriate tasks that need to be completed within that?
Yeah, with the fire kit trial, we asked for fire kits that had been washed 6 times. Fire kit can get washed up to about 40 times. But so it was warm before it had been de-shrink in a fire kit shrink within a tolerance, so that if it's washed 6 times, you get a feel for how it's going to feel in after a few washes, rather than wearing it for weeks on end.
Yeah, that's a really, really good point. Alan, John touched on a point earlier about fit, that they had someone in fire kit that they felt they were too hot in, but actually on reflection it was they were in the wrong size. And I know BSF have done a lot of work on kind of fit testing, and you've got a whole network of fit testers for certain types of products for respiratory. Yeah. So the importance of fit in general is something that BSF are well aware of. So yeah, be interested to see how you think that can be incorporated.
Well, I think it can be incorporated by doing it for the products that you're trying. Yeah, I think what the crucial difference is with respiratory protection is it can appear to fit, but it doesn't fit, right? Unless it's properly fit tested. If your boots or footwear don't fit, they'll hurt. It won't hurt you if your mask doesn't fit you, but it will harm you. So it has to be part of the whole protocol.
And I guess some kind of, thinking about where you've got ensembles or total systems that are being worn together, that sometimes maybe part of the tender process, there can be some information from that tenderer to explain how those bits of kit should be worn together, so that you do get that information. Like for your firefighter, you have to be able to, you need space around it so you can move, that kind of thing. I think is really helpful and perfectly reasonable to ask the tenderer to supply anonymously. I would always recommend, because we know there are certain times where certain brands or suppliers are preferred by users who've had their pair of boots for 15 years and they love them. So anonymity as much as possible is always sort of what we would recommend, so that you are really assessing on the basis of the trial and the product.
This episode of the Emergency Services Times podcast is sponsored by MSA Safety, proudly supporting emergency services and first responders on the front line. At MSA Safety, protecting first responders isn't just what we do, it's who we are. We work closely with fire and rescue services across the UK to develop and deliver safety solutions designed to meet your ever-evolving needs. That includes MSA Bristol Firefighter PPE, trusted by services across the UK and beyond, shaped through years of collaboration with frontline teams. It also includes our growing investment in innovation and technology, from the connected M1 SCBA modular solution to our agile, fully managed service model that helps keep crews protected and ready to respond. But for us, safety goes beyond equipment. We believe in standing shoulder to shoulder with the people who dedicate their lives to protecting others, whether it's supporting firefighter charities, backing mental health initiatives, or showing up for community events. MSA is proud to be part of the emergency services family. To learn more about our work in the UK and how we're supporting first responders every step of the way, visit www.msasafety.com. With MSA Safety, when you go in, we go in with you.
Simon, for you, what are the kind of best practices that you've seen in trials, and do you ever get feedback, whether you're successful or unsuccessful? That's another area that's interesting.
Yeah, and the feedback generally comes at the end.
Yeah.
When you go, yes, you've won or you've not won. So ongoing feedback is difficult. I mean, we sometimes, and it works quite well, is if you can get involved with the fitting beforehand, then you can make sure the boot actually fits. And socks is important. If you turn up in a pair of old football socks and then expect everybody to fit comfortably, then there's an issue. So we can have that initial feedback of how does it feel, blah, 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 and make sure it fits and feels. And then obviously, as I'm sure you know, throughout the process, we tend to step back a little bit and let the process go on. And then, the feedback at the end. But it's always good for future for us to then get a good, to find out you've just failed. Great, but why? What was, what won and where did we fall short? Because we're always trying to improve our product. We always want to make sure, okay, we failed because of this reason. We'll make a change.
Feedback is a really good point. So again, from having spent so much time on the supplier side, just getting a "Dear John" letter, you weren't successful, it gives you nothing. And there's a lot of time and cost that's gone into getting that trial or that tender process together. And what we always endorse when we're advising clients is that we give as much information as possible back to the supplier. So in our instance, we give technical feedback about product, which allows them to make improvements or to consider what actually was really good, but they still weren't successful, because that really helps them to be able to develop for the future. And I think if there's anything that an unsuccessful tenderer can get out of a process, then future improvements is a massive part. It's a big investment for suppliers to do that. The other thing that I was thinking about is how wearer trials are evaluated in the tender, in terms of like, how are they scored? Is it pass fail? What data are you capturing? And does your like the specific feedback that you get directly correlate to a mark that somebody gets? And we've seen it, and I'm not sure if, like, from both John and Simon's point of view, what your views are on that, like kind of how you would do it. We've seen a few different ways. One is that in the main they're not pass fail, but they form part of the award criteria. And you would look at having options where either you agreed a score together, so not an average, but agree a score together as a sort of collaborative agreed score for it, and then that might be extrapolated out to a number of marks. But we've also seen, and more recently this has been implemented in some of the work that we've been doing, is to say, if there's 4 of us and we've got 400 marks to give for the wearer trial, we're each allocated 100 marks, and you break that down by the number. So there might be several products that you're evaluating, so they all get divvied out, and then if I give it an 8, they get 8 marks, and it becomes a direct correlation. I think it makes it a lot clearer and a lot easier to calculate, but it does mean you get the swings of opinion that kind of influence the scoring as well. So there's like pros and cons for both, but it's interesting to think about it. What do you guys do, John? What's your approach?
What we score out of 0 to 5 usually, and where it's trials, it can be 0, 2, 3, 5, or 0, 1, 2, 3, or 4, 5. And when we give our feedback, we give feedback where they haven't scored maximum scores, so that each supplier, they get the technical data that provided by third parties, and they also get the scoring from any quality scoring that we have to do. Interesting what you said about everyone scoring like that, because what we do is we go through it, and then we have the stakeholders who are involved, and we have a consensus scoring. So that, because someone might say something's a 2, something's a 3, something's a 5, because you're never going to get the same scores off everyone. And then it might come out when you add them all up, it averages out 4.5. Well, it is a 4. Or is it a 5? And then that's where the consensus comes in. I think if you've got a well-rounded team from of stakeholders, then you get a valid score.
I think where we've seen that fall down is where there's been a lot of different roles or ranks within a scoring system, or someone who's got the loudest voice, which would probably be me in that environment. That if it's not managed, then you've got the influence of someone who might be, the most popular voice or the most senior person in the room, and that's the bit that you need to work on. So we've seen wearer trial being done where it's the procurement team have had a phone call or a one-to-one meeting with each of the trialists, and then explained and got the scores from them, and then when they've got all the scores, they've said, okay, this is what our scoring is for this system, because it's not been influenced by anyone else. But if you're managing it, which it sounds like you are, then you can do it in
that's where the do's and don'ts come in, and the ground rules. And, everyone matters who's in that room. It's, but I take your point. You could have someone, I don't know, the senior officers come in, and you might be mates with someone, I don't know, but I wouldn't stand for anything like that, I must admit.
Good to hear.
I wouldn't have them in the room in the first place.
It is, and where evaluation is can be a really, really helpful part of the process if it's managed properly. It helps wearers feel like they've been engaged. If you do, as John said, with your example, if you just trialled it with people from Mersey and you hadn't looked at any of the other counties that are involved, then it becomes the Mersey product, and then it's always a problem. Like I think that's a key thing where you are geographically spread, even within a county, is making sure you've got representation geographically as well. I think that's quite helpful.
Yeah, I'd say your point about the scoring method you've done, but it works for us. And like I say, we set the ground rules at the beginning, and you're going to have strong personalities from different brigades.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
you gotta be fair to the suppliers.
Yeah.
And transparent as well with the feedback.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I'm not saying that either version is the right one, but the point about it is, are you thinking about that when you're putting your technical assessment together and you know that you want to do a wearer trial? Do you know before you go out to tender how you're going to score it? You have to know that information and have thought through the implementation of that wearer trial in order to make it work, and so that it's transparent for suppliers so they know what to expect and how the scoring they're expecting to have reflected back to them. And as you said, Simon, really helpful getting that feedback.
Yeah, it is. And I think the difficult thing, certainly from your perspective, well, is taking the subjectivity out of it. Because it's hard, footwear in particular is very subjective. People go, well, I love these, well, I don't like those. And it's difficult to say, well, how do you score that?
Yeah.
Just because Jim over there doesn't like it, but Bob over there loves them.
Yeah.
It's exactly the same boot. They're both a size 10. So it's how is that scored?
And I think that's the thing. It's supposed to be subjective. That you're asking people to trial a product and give you their opinion on it. So that's the bit that we need to quantify it in a way that makes that transparent, because that's where the challenge comes in terms of, certain people just didn't like it or they didn't like the look of it, and it depends what questions you're asking in the trial. So don't ask questions about the design. Ask questions about the comfort, the performance. How did it work for you when you were trialing it, doing your job? And once you take that bit out, it's not the, not the wish list of what does it look like. It's more objective than that then.
John, do you ever get manufacturers involved midway through the trial or give feedback before the pass-fail type of position?
I'm just looking at them tents over there, because we done one for the National Resilience, where in the trial, the firefighters and the inclusion of the firefighters is important as well, and their feedback. And during the trial, they were saying the drain on this tent, it was where they were washing down after chemical incidents, and they were saying the drain's in the wrong place. It should be over here. Where the pipes are coming in are in the wrong place, where it's spraying. This needs to be adjusted. So in that respect, we can modify it and improve the innovation.
Perfect.
I think you can also formalise it as well. So if you're putting a new range of product in that's being tested for the first time in a particular style, what you can do is build in, depending on the procurement process that you choose, but you could look at a negotiated procedure where you've got the ability to do that. So you might be shortlisting and then negotiating with suppliers to finalise a particular product range or something like that. So you can also do that. So again, knowing before you go out to market how you're assessing a tender, what your specifications are, what you're going to do in terms of wearer trial, where it's going to happen, knowing all that in advance will also help determine what type of procurement process that you go for. And the biggest difficulty for tender processes is the length of time that it takes. So if you're not looking sort of 12 to 18 months ahead of what do we think this is going to look like, you might not have built in enough time before the end of your next contract to go through a 4-stage process or a 2-stage process. And sometimes that determines the process because of the time rather than the actual requirement determining the process. So it's why we would always say look that bit further ahead and start to build these things in. I think it's time for questions if we are ready for that.
Hi, I'm Brian Kyle. I'm the procurement manager at Police Scotland. Today I've been sort of asking people not about evaluation through the tender process. How do we enable innovation despite the tender process? because the tender process is a fixed period, point in time, and it's good to hear there's loads of different ways you could incorporate trials or whatever, but actually when we've done that, that's happened, and then there's 4 years or 5 years until the next time we do it. So I'm really trying to hear from suppliers, what do you want us to do in between or in the lead up to make that development keep happening and not just stop and only be about the sales process?
So from my point of view, what I would recommend is that you engage early with industry, so that you've got a better idea today of what the future contract could look like. So you're already starting to do some of the investigative work around what's the state of the art today. I'd also say that particularly in the sectors that we're talking about here, that you have the right to make changes based on your operational requirements or legislative or regulatory changes being made. Because, for example, with PFAS, which is a big issue, if there's a new legislative requirement around PFAS that you can't currently meet in your tender process, how do you deal with that? So we would always recommend putting a kind of blanket statement within the process to allow you to do that, because there's things outside of even your control that might determine that you have to make a change to something. So those are probably the two ways. I'm not sure, John, for you, what you would do.
Yeah, we'd put something in the contract itself. I don't know, are you talking about when you've won a bid and you...
We always write things into contracts, and then they kind of sit there for 4 years, you know, and it's like, what do we do? We're always open to changing something.
Yeah.
You know, there might be legislation which prevents us doing certain things, but how do we get away from that cycle of we've won and now we're supplying you the thing, and it's the same thing I've asked everybody who supplies this stuff. They say, oh, we'll get this new thing, and how do we engage with you? You know, the contract can allow it.
Yeah.
How do we make that a focus rather than just the next, you know, sales bit?
I think it's something that you can put to your supplier to challenge them as well, to say, as part of your contract management meetings, you want to have innovation discussions, or you want once a year for them to bring you something new that they've developed for somebody else, and you can build that into your contract management processes as much as anything as well. So there's a few ways.
I got the impression you were talking more generally than that one successful supplier. That was my pickup.
Yes.
I think you just get with the potential suppliers, explain needs, do a bit of what ifs, and I imagine suppliers will only be too delighted to engage in that way.
Yeah, you could do meet the procurement team days or something like that.
Yeah.
Where you get the the lead suppliers in industry coming to engage in a conference room at your headquarters or something like that, and you could talk it over, or you could have managed meetings. But under new procurement rules, you can, after 3 years, you'd open it up, you can open up the market again. I don't know how that's going to work because I haven't done that yet, but, you know.
And I would say, contrary to that...
Not in Scotland. Yeah,
contrary to that, actually, 3-year contracts are quite difficult for suppliers, because you lose money in the first year, so you're only really making money or recovering the money as you get through the contract. So we would also suggest that longer term contracting allows suppliers to put more investment in R&D, and you might find that you're getting more of that innovation and more of those that kind of engagement from them. If you've got a 3-year contract, there's very little scope for them to heavily invest in it. So you either need to specify it before you go to tender, which is what we talked about earlier, or you need to have a mechanism for engagement, and maybe like a technical refresh after so long when you're looking at product. And getting feedback from wearers as you go through, like not just evaluating product as we've talked about in the tender process, but get the feedback in the first place to develop the specs before you go to tender, and then look at continual engagement with your teams to look at what's working and what isn't, because you might find that they love it, and in that case you'd be forcing a technical refresh for the sake of it. So you don't know, or it might be a disaster and you need to do something. So unless you're engaging throughout a whole process, that it kind of you don't know what you don't know, I guess.
Look, that's great. It's good to get the feedback, and I think we do loads of these things and we make loads of these arrangements, but we still get the same result a lot of the time, which is we're in a contract and we just deliver it. So I'm trying to think outside a bit, but how we have that in the contract, but actually really engage in it and make it happen, for the whole life cycle. You're right. It sometimes depends on the commerciality of something. If it's huge, it makes sense to do it. If it's a very small thing, it doesn't. But that, to Alan's point, I guess, about the wider thing, sometimes we find as well it's difficult to get people to engage because they're with their peers and competitors and they don't really want to do it. They'll turn up.
Yeah, well, the again, the good, the bad, and the ugly stuff. So the worst ones we've seen is you come and have a supplier engagement day, and everyone sits in a room like this, and then you say, right, so what's the latest innovation? And everyone goes, well, I'm telling you, because they're going to know then. So if you are going to do it, as John said, arrange one-to-one meetings or have a day where you do that kind of engagement, because suppliers would love to peacock and showboat to you everything they're doing, that they won't do it in front of their competitors, and I don't blame them for that. But I think, you can do lots of things. The other thing I would say is that you can make, without having to do anything too dramatic, if you've got some feedback about fit, for example, on a pair of trousers, you can make a change to that within the contract without having to do anything different, because you're still supplying a trouser, but we're just making it better. So there's other things that you can do that don't need a really huge or formal process for you to be able to deliver improvement in the contract as well. Thank you very much for your time and enjoy the rest of the day.
Thanks for listening. Remember that by taking time to learn from our speakers, you can earn CPD points from our partner CPDme. So do check out the link in the show notes. Our thanks to MSA Safety for their continued support for our podcast and Smart Digital for producing this series. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to subscribe to For Every Response, the podcast from Emergency Services Times.